look, I'm dyslexic. Can you help me?
Hey squirrels, welcome to AVHD, where ADHD isn't some clinical diagnosis, it's just life. I'm AV, your always honest tour guide through this beautiful mess. Over here, we're not about fixing yourself. We're about figuring out how to actually enjoy your life as you are. So grab a snack and let's go. All right, jumping straight in. Welcome back, squirrels. Today we are talking about dyslexia in the workplace, not just as a personal challenge, but as a catalyst for culture change. And today I'm super excited to be joined by Gareth Humphreys. Gareth is the co-chair of the Neurodiversity Staff Network in the NHS Blood and Transplant based in the UK. The network works to improve the working lives of colleagues with neurodiverse conditions and carers through awareness, support, and training. Gareth himself was diagnosed with dyslexia in the early 90s and now leads a team of data analysts and scientists answering complex donor-related queries. So, Gareth, welcome. Thank you so much for being
Thank you.
You were diagnosed in the early 90s?
Yes.
Way before the tools we have today.
Yeah.
What's up with that?
Oh, so I mean, it started even before that. So I'm fairly ancient, and I think in the it's I'm going to say 1981. It was between 1981 and 1983 at primary school when I first started. I couldn't catch a ball. They threw me a ball. I couldn't catch it, and I went off to test at Great Ormond Street, which is a very famous children's hospital in the UK. And I don't remember anything about the tests. I don't remember anything about the outcomes, but apart from being suspected when I was dyslexia. But all I remember at the trip was it was very exciting because I was a small boy. I went on unusual buses. I'm a bit of a transport geek. I went on an underground train and I had a Wimpy burger because it was so long ago McDonald's wasn't commonplace in the UK. So we had our own chain called Wimpy. And that's where it first was sort of picked up. And then it was picked up later at secondary school. So this would be the early 90s. 1992, I think, was my first assessment. Then I had another one in 94 and the final one was 96 at university. So yeah, the tools have completely changed. It's a very different world. You know, when I was at university, I had a lovely big beige computer. It's very different to my little silver laptop and dual monitors now.
Absolutely. So what was it like growing up and then entering the workforce with dyslexia at that time?
It was, well, I mean, growing up with it, I didn't, it's a very long time ago. I remember the hardest thing was handwriting and to a certain extent reading. I couldn't understand why I couldn't read certain books. And the reason being was the font. You know, it had all the serifs on. I can't, it's really hard to read. But it was the handwriting, constantly told that my handwriting was scruffy, that I couldn't spell this and that. And, having to write very slow, if I want my writing to be legible, I have to write very slowly. The only sort of bit of advice that actually worked was to write with a fountain pen, because if you can't try and write fast with a traditional fountain pen and a nib,
And smudge.
and you'll break the nib. So I can now write very nice and neatly with a fountain pen, but I write at a snail's pace. So it's clear, it's legible, but I can't take notes in things. So it was always hard taking notes.
Interesting.
Exams were brutal. The A levels I took when I was 18, I got extra time, so I had 4 hours of exams, and I had 2 in one day. So writing a long essays on history and politics, that was hard. Your hands were aching by the end. It was very, very different. And then the workplace, yeah, it was different. So initially, I was a history teacher. I went to uni. I went back. I did a uni and teacher training college. I always got support. And in the education system, we didn't get any. We didn't have any of the nice, fancy electronic whiteboards you have now that project PowerPoints. I had to write everything up manually, making sure that it was nice and legible. I had to write school reports by hand, and then people complained that they weren't imaginatively written. It was like, well, I'm trying not to make any spelling mistakes. So it was quite a challenge because we just didn't have the technology in those schools. So I didn't last long as a teacher. And then moving to the workplace in the early sort of 2000s, I mean, you had the basics. So we had spell checkers, but they weren't very good. And the other thing is that you could add your own words. Do you remember you being able to add to the dictionary? So occasionally I'd click the wrong button. So then my spelling mistakes were preserved for.
That was my main challenge. My dictionary was full of words that were not words.
So one boss would know that I'd spell check something if some of the words were a mistake. I was at the time working for the Met Police as an analyst, and I met some interesting characters. So I would opt out and wouldn't take notes. So I'd discreetly have a word with my manager, who was fine with that because I disclosed it. But there was an incident with a detective sergeant. I don't know, detective sergeants in the Met are sort of quite a rare breed. This was an old school guy, really could be quite abrasive character. And I got accused of being drunk because there were so many spelling mistakes in a piece of work. And he didn't say, "Are you drunk?" He said, there was quite a lot of fruity language involved, and the person had quite a strong Irish accent, and I told him I was dyslexic, and then he was like, "Oh," and he actually was very good at spelling, and the reason he reacted like that, what he thought he was doing was joking and trying to take the tension down, but
Mhm.
I don't think as a manager or someone in an office he knew what to do, and therefore he was just like, "Ah." And his sort of reaction was to try and make a sort of slightly aggressive joke of it. In actual fact, the person was a very nice individual. Once you got to know them, they were really supportive. They would spell check my work. When my wife fell pregnant unexpectedly, and we were looking for a housing, he offered us some rooms in his house because he had a big house. So this was a nice guy, but just the way as a manager he dealt with it was, I don't think he knew what to do or what to say.
And before I ask my next question, teeny side tangent, because you said that you got extra time for your written exams when you
Yes.
were in school. And I was thinking, how interesting is it that when we think accommodation, we think make it easier for the person.
Mm.
But if you take that framing and apply it to, for example, getting extra time on your exam, what someone from the outside isn't necessarily considering when they look at that accommodation is that this person now needs to sit for
Yes.
twice the amount of time as everyone else
Mm.
in order to get just done, right?
Yes.
So the accommodation makes it possible. It doesn't make it easy.
Yes, and there's the accommodate at the time, you could get extra time in exams, and I think if you were really had very severe dyslexia, there was an option for someone to scribe the exams for you, but that was very, very rare. Certainly, I didn't know anyone who had that, but you had the extra time at the end of the exams. So 3 hours in, everyone's getting up, and leaving, so there's a bit of a disturbance. I had one case with an invigilator who tried to throw me out because I carried on writing, and my mates had to point out that I'd got, you look on the board, but when I went and did marketing exams about 10, 15 years later, it was very different. They gave you the extra time at the start. So you finished the
Mm.
exam at the end, you got to see with your friends, you could actually at the end go, "Gosh, that was hard, that was easy," that sort of thing. I didn't have that, doing my A-levels of
Instead
duty.
of walking out by yourself.
Yes,
Yeah.
walking out by myself through an empty school. It didn't. It was very different. But yes, you're right. It doesn't. It was a hard accommodation because I had to go through and check everything, and I had to make sure my writing was legible and I hadn't pressed down. It was hard work. I found it easier at university where there was a lot more coursework, and I actively avoided long dissertations and things like that. But but lecturers were much more open to support, and every time I've gone to university, I've been at university 3 times, they found them very supportive. Sometimes they would even let you send your essays in, a week early. They'd proofread them, comment back. So by the time you submitted it, you knew that you were going to pass, or you knew you had to do something. The first time around, I didn't really have that much confidence disclosing to the lecturers. The second time when I was doing teacher training, and the third time when I did my masters, no problems. I was just, "Yeah, look, I'm dyslexic. Can you help me?" And they were fine. I'd get lots of help. They'd comment and they'd, review my work. It was much better. I think they also gave me some allowances, so I wouldn't get marked down for poor spelling and grammar. It's when you're sort of handing in a 20,000 page word dissertation, there's a very high chance that I could have sneaked a few typos and grammatical errors in
Mm.
there. So yeah, it wasn't perhaps the greatest adjustment you could have got.
I'm curious, when you're in the examples that you're bringing up with being accused of being drunk, suspected of being drunk at work, and presumably not disclosing before that in the workplace, and disclosing in academic settings, how did those types of experiences and other experiences shape your communication and your disclosure in those spaces?
So something around, I was probably in my early 20s, and something just snapped, and I thought, I just don't care. Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much it. I just didn't care. So when I did teacher training, I described was very open. When I worked for the police, I was very open with my manager, and yeah, it helped a lot because I got the support, and I disclosed when I started my current job. I sort of disclosed it when I was a teacher, but I didn't really get the support I got. I got much more support
Mhm.
training to be a teacher than I did actually being a teacher. And yet I'd be there expected to watch in case, spotting if children had, and it was teacher training in those days, it was mainly focused on boys, having, the disruptive boy at the back of the class who was paying attention, or the dyslexic with their ADHD, that sort of thing.
Those are my favorite kind.
Yeah. And so, yeah, you expected to spot people potentially who are neurodiverse, but not getting much support yourself, which always felt very, very odd. Like I said, I only lasted a year, and I'm quite glad to have left, to be honest.
Are there accommodations or requirements, like diversity requirement hiring in the UK as there are in places in the world? And does that apply to schools as well?
There are requirements. So we call it a work the two tick scheme, but broadly, if you on an application form, there's a box to tick, and I think it's a legal requirement. And if you tick it, you declare that you have a disability under, I think it's a 1996 or 2006 act, and that act allows, if you meet the basic criteria for the role at a paper sift, you are guaranteed an interview.
Mm.
So that does help, and dyslexia is covered by the act. So originally at school, I was told, I went to a grammar school, so I passed a test when I was 11 to go to school. So you're always seen as meant to be a high achiever. You're meant to go to university. Dyslexia wasn't really on their radar, and they would say never disclose anything like that. I actually decided that I didn't really like the school, so I'd do everything they told me not to. And so, yeah, I'd tick the box because, it's, some people might consider it cheating, but, I'm legally allowed to. I need every little bit of help I can get, because if you're going to judge me on my spelling or why something's, not perfectly worded, at least then there's an answer for that. And I can explain that at interview or explain that to the recruiter and have a chance of getting that job. Because really what you want to do is, you don't want to recruit a sort of very narrow group of people. You want to recruit, different types of creative thinking, different kinds of minds to get the best for your business.
Absolutely. When I was living in Israel, I found that when people would pick up on my Hebrew, that it's not quite native Hebrew, it's
Yeah.
slightly accented, they would treat me very differently than they treated somebody with heavily accented Hebrew. Even if it's a heavy, like, Anglo accent, like they're speaking Hebrew as an American, automatically somebody who speaks with an accented language gets treated as dumber than. Is spelling kind of similar? When you have poor spelling, people think you're dumb?
I think so. In some cases, they think you're dumb, or they think you're careless.
Both are bad.
Yeah, I think it depends on people's outlook. I was always told, he's careless. I'm also very clumsy. Those sort of things. You've just got to try harder. You've just got to work harder. You've just got to learn it. And there is an element of that. That just doesn't sit right. It's not. It's I can't help it. Judge me on the outputs that I do. I find that most people, although they may pick up on spelling mistakes, in fact, I'm particularly harsh on myself. I can tell that I put a typo in something when I've sent it. Like, oh gosh, I missed that. But actually, most people's brains are really good at reading through that. You can read an odd mistake. Some people may choose to notice and comment on it, but actually they can understand it. And that's the main thing, is about understanding what someone's written and finding alternative ways. Not everyone wants to sit there and read huge documents or write huge documents. Some people want to hear, things, or present things. I much prefer presenting to writing, and I'd much rather pick up the phone than write an email some of the time.
Yeah. I think that what you're saying is why it's so important to hit that point of no longer caring,
Yes, I suppose so.
because otherwise, what are you supposed to do?
Yes. Yes, you could really tie yourself up in knots. You could get quite anxious, you get quite down. I heard recently from some neurodiverse speakers that the amount of times that a child with ADHD is told off is a huge amount more than perhaps someone without it, because sit still. Why can't you just stand still? All those sort of things.
Micro corrections by age 8 is the stat right now.
I think that's the one I heard. I couldn't quite remember the 23rd, but it's huge. And it's the same.
It's huge.
Yeah, and the same for people with dyslexia. Told about your spelling, told
Mhm.
about, reading or writing, handwriting. I was at school in a world where we might have had one computer per school, so everything was handwritten. And I was one of the last people to be able to write with a pen. I was made to write with a pencil for years. I was one of the last people to write joined up. But that's, them various teachers at secondary schools say, you need to try this pen or that pen, and it wasn't the pen that was the problem.
Right. It's not the pen.
Yeah.
The pen is fine.
Yeah, the pen's fine.
And you've seen huge advances in technology over time. You were talking about kind of basic spell check, and now we have open dyslexic font,
Yeah.
AI tools. How has tech changed your day-to-day work and your day-to-day life?
It's been huge. I mean, you may not notice it each day or even each month, but if I compare where I was 1996, just starting university, I had a big beige computer. It couldn't connect to the internet. Had a very basic spell checker. I was meant to get some software that could read aloud to me, but I couldn't get it in time, so I never had it on my computer. Now you fast forward to now. So this is what 30 years later. I've got my, and this is most of the stuff now isn't sort of adding ons and costs. I've got Microsoft will read me my emails. I can dictate pretty accurately now through Microsoft's own things. They may not be perfect, but for most people, they're bundled in, very easy to get access to. Spell check is still a bit iffy. I think you can get better spell checkers, but you can, like you said, you've got AI tools. So open dyslexic font, changing the background. Open dyslexic font in the Kindle's fantastic. I can now actually enjoy reading, but I can also send documents as a PDF via an email to my Kindle and read with an open dyslexic font on a nice screen. I actually read books now. I went years without reading a book, and now I'm cracking. I'm usually in the summer reading sporting biographies on Tour de France or something. But that's made a huge. And now Copilot AI that's our. We use Microsoft at work, and I know there's other AI tools available, but we've got a safe Copilot one, and it's brilliant. It can, yes, it can help you with your documents to improve your writing. It also means if someone sends me a very long document to read, I can put it into a summary. I can ask for it to
Like, what are they even trying to tell me?
Yes.
Because I don't care about their dog.
And the interesting thing is sometimes companies will, they might send you an updated document and Copilot might give you a very similar summary because actually the updates may have made it longer, but they may not have actually added anything to it. So it's actually quite an interesting way of detecting sort of BS because you can see, what they've actually made is making changes. But, that Copilot's great. We've just started a trial to get the full one where I think it can rewind some of the messages and integrates a bit better. But it's really making a difference. I used to always avoid taking minutes in meetings because they just wouldn't make any sense, or I wouldn't be in the meeting. Now I can let Copilot read the transcription. The transcription is usually fairly odd. Copilot I did a day at a whole conference on R and Python, so like quite in-depth coding languages, and it plowed through it and created a couple of days. I had some nice 4-page summaries of bullet points. I could see really great. I didn't have to sit there and try and scroll notes and not be there. I just let my phone record it into Word and then summarize it later.
I was just going through, I'm partnering now with a nonprofit that I worked
Yep.
with last 6 years ago. So I was going through some of my original minutes from meetings when I worked in-house at the organization. It's like I can see the struggle.
Yeah.
First of all, these minutes do not make sense. If I were the CEO of that company, of that nonprofit, I would never accept these minutes. They are disorganized. They don't contain all the information. They don't have dates or decisions. I don't do any of that now. I set a recording. I trust myself and the person that I'm working with to bounce the ideas back and forth with each other and come some kind of solution. And I run it through AI after that. All my ideas, all my thoughts captured better in a way that can be communicated more clearly to other people.
Yes, exactly. I think it's fantastic. It's a huge step forward. It's great. You're not having to worry about that. Now I've got my notebook there to just make sure I write things down before I forget them that I want to say, so that my brain can stay in the meeting. It's only a
Exactly.
couple of words, and I know what to say.
Do these tools solve the issues for people who need more supports in the workplace, or are workplace attitudes still more important?
I think it's a mix. So the tools help, and the fact that they're so easy to access. Our IT departments have allowed open dyslexic font. There's a number of add-ons, so we can get that added into Chrome. There's readers you can add into. We never quite know whether it's Chrome or Edge, it's our official browser, but we're allowed very limited add-ons, but we can get the open dyslexic one because they did their due diligence and found that it was very, very safe. We've got a screen reader for some PDFs now as well. So those tools can really make a big difference to start off with. So you can straight away, if someone comes asking for support, you can say, look, here's all the tools. Attitudes are important. I think, you can always try and change attitudes. So I couple of years ago, I did a presentation on sort of my journeys with dyslexia. A senior sort of marketing manager at the end, this person worked in copywriting. So they were very used to spotting errors. And he said, I'd usually put everyone up on spelling mistakes all the time. It drove me mad. He said, but actually, hearing your story, he says, that's probably not a behavior I should be doing. And in fact, I'll try and rein myself in from it. Because
Oh, lovely.
so, yeah, I mean, definitely use his skills to spot all those errors when he's sending out a campaign. But when he's reading someone's email, he was really trying to make it. He said he was going to make the change. So I thought that was really positive. So attitudes can help. And sometimes the attitudes are just simple things like, allowing a bit of time, just a bit of time to reply. Sometimes you can get bombarded with messages and just adapting to different people's styles. I think that's important for everyone. Just some people like to work in one way. Don't necessarily force one way of working on everybody, because you need to tailor things for people.
I'm sort of curious to get your take, because I was having a debate with somebody the other day, and they were applying for a job, and they would like some accommodations at the workplace. So I asked them what accommodations they were looking for. The accommodations they mentioned were being able to take shorter, more frequent breaks as opposed to one long break, to have instructions in writing, and one more thing. Oh, to have some flexibility to attend medical appointments as necessary. And it's a hybrid remote role.
Yeah.
So, and I said, are those even accommodations? Because it kind of sounds like a normal person who needs flexibility in their workplace. And my stance was, don't frame them as accommodations. And her stance was, if I frame them as accommodations, maybe I'm more likely to get them from the workplace. So I'm kind of curious. This is in the US, so possibly a little different than the UK. But I'm curious what you think of that.
Well, we used to have the word from used to be called reasonable adjustments, but it was
Mhm.
too easy to deny them, saying they were unreasonable to the business. So they're called workplace adjustments. They all sound perfectly sensible adjustments. I think the other thing is, one of the things you have to consider with adjustments is the cost, and the cost of your business of not making them. If you didn't give that person that adjustment, there's a potential for a tribunal. So those adjustments that you mentioned they don't cost anything to do, but the cost of a tribunal could be minimum tens of thousands of pounds or dollars. So that's the cost if you don't get them right. There's very few workplace adjustments that are like, I've heard people wanting accommodation for their support animal. This person had a pony, a Shetland pony, one of their little horses.
Totally.
They wanted stables built. That was more of a challenge, and that's the one where you can't get. But generally, most adjustments you need are very straightforward. A lot of the time, it's some software, it's some time, it's some allowances. Some people I had a colleague I've known for years call me up and go, someone working is they've got autism, and they're very sensitive to light, and they don't like the flickering bulbs. He's like, how do I change that in the office? And he was so pleased when I said, it's such a simple thing. You call up facilities, or the main building maintenance, they take out the bulb. You then go, we have a procurement system where you order paper, printer cartridges, all that. So you can order desk lamps. So for the cost of a new mouse, a desk lamp was ordered. Came a couple of days later, problem solved. So he was very pleased that this was such a simple adjustment, but that made a difference. It made the person feel like they could work comfortably. Very, very simple, very cost effective. Probably cost of a couple of reams of paper or something.
A lot of companies say that they offer reasonable adjustments, but accessing them can be so very difficult
Yes. And I think
and emotional also. What I didn't like about this person who I was debating is that I felt like they were painting themselves as somebody in need of assistance when, in my view, you're just a person.
Yes, and I think we've run a couple of surveys in the network to understand, the ease of getting adjustments, and a lot of it is to do with that interpersonal relationship with your manager. And some managers are very open, are very good at doing that. A lot of managers are a little unsure, and therefore don't always know where to get the information. Some managers are just so busy they don't know, or they don't know where to turn for help, and that's where I think a lot of the challenges come. There's always going to be a fraction who is just dead against anything, but generally most people, some people will just go, right, I'm going to find that solution. That's fine, just do it. Other people, and that's what we've been trying to do with the network, is signpost support for managers so that they can go and just get yeah, this is, like I said, my colleague, very simple. You can do this, you can do it in 10 minutes. So it's that sort of thing, and getting the managers to, yeah, we should be accommodating. I think the challenge comes in, certainly in our business, the challenge comes when the support staff in offices is very easy to be flexible, to work from home one day, to work in an office the next, to get up and stand on the right. It's much more difficult in either a clinical or a scientific, like laboratory environment, because they're very rigid. If you're collecting blood, it's clinical, it's very organized, it's very hard to make adjustments. It's not impossible. Same for in the labs. In fact, last year, one colleague in a lab wrote an excellent blog about they were dyslexic, and they used color coding to reduce the accident rates. And that's what they did. They adapted it across a whole lab and department to make things safer. So, the adjustments can be done, but some places can be harder because you've got to do very set times, especially blood collection teams. You go out for 8 hours in a van. So you're not able to perhaps be as flexible as can. I mean, I'm sure there are other accommodations that can be done.
Yeah.
So the challenge is when you get to those very rigid environments.
That's really interesting because you now co-chair the Neurodiversity Staff Network, of
Yeah.
course, at NHS Blood and Transplant. And as you're saying, blood and transplant, of course, regulation is key because
Yeah.
safety is key, patient safety is key. When are there jobs that people who have particular support needs just should avoid?
I don't think there's any jobs anyone should particularly avoid. I think, we can usually accommodate, a lot of people work, our members work across all elements. Mm, But I think it's, one of the challenges we have as a network is we're very good at reaching the people who have access to the internet regularly. The people in our central offices supporting. It's much harder to reach people in the labs. And sometimes, I've donned my white coat and gone into a lab and done a presentation on my laptop. I had to wheel it on a sterile trolley into the lab, talk to them. They were really open and really interested to it. The lab staff are at least all together in one building, and they're easy to get to. It's really hard with the collection teams. We've got 50 odd mobile teams across the country, usually all away from the sort of main hubs in the offices. So they may not see someone from the centre very often. So actually they're very disparate and they're very independent. And that's the challenge, getting out to them and sharing the work. Some are easier than others, but it's getting out there, finding ways to get the message out and where the support is. Having said that, some people are very good, and you get calls from, senior sisters asking to support their staff members or even themselves sometimes, or their colleagues with neurodiversity. We also then, we'll have support people who are carers, for example, of neurodiverse dependents. So, and then in those situations, how you go out and get access to appointments for education and things like that, because they don't tend to be in the evening. They tend to be, in the day when people are working. So those are some of the challenges we deal with. It's usually everything has to be individual. I think no one's the same.
If you'll allow me one more inflammatory
Yeah.
question. What would you say to somebody who does not feel like it is worth all that effort to employ neurodivergent people? That sounds like a lot of work.
I don't think it's a lot of work. I don't think it is a lot of work to employ neurodivergent people. I think what is important is that as a team leader, a manager, whoever you are, you need to create an environment where people can bring as much of their selves to work. Because the more people bring of themselves to work, the more chance you have for ideas, for creativity, for lateral thinking, for problem solving. And that's not just about neurodiversity, that's about everyone, because everyone's got very different lived experiences. And allowing people to bring a lot more lived experience in, I think, gives you a much stronger and wider thought process. If you have a very narrow thought process, you get the same results. And if the results aren't going well, you're just getting the same negative results again and again. So having that breadth of thinking is really important, and neurodiverse people help doing that. A lot of the time, it isn't a huge amount of work. A lot of the time, it's just managing people, dealing with their individual needs, and that could be the same for as a manager. You'd have to deal with if one of your colleagues has a sick child, in and out of hospital. You have to manage that. Same or other things. So it's part of being a manager and part of looking after your staff. And I find that if you treat staff well, they want to stay with the company. And the people, but sometimes when you make a real effort, and you perhaps bend a rule a little bit to give them that support they need at the time, they'll repay that tenfold, and they'll be with the company for longer, cutting down that huge cost of retention and recruitment. So, great drain on resources, not having to do that because you're looking after your staff and treating them well. is great. That's saving you money.
100%. I tell my team all the time, I care about you, but even if I didn't care about you, it's good business for me to care about you.
Yes,
It hurts my bottom line if I don't.
exactly.
None of us want to show up to work for someone that we hate.
No.
I'm going back now to a nonprofit that I left literally 6 years ago, almost to the day. And I'm going back to the same management team. They're welcoming me back with open arms. And when they hired me, I was in my first interview with a tiny baby.
Mm.
I walked into that interview with a 6-week-old baby in a stroller.
Mm.
And the CEO at the time said to me, like, how are you going to be able to handle all of these things? There's so much going on. And I was sitting there in a job interview with them, pushing the baby stroller with one hand. And I was like, I think I'll be okay. As long as you can be flexible with
Yeah.
me a little bit in a very reasonable way, all the work will still get done. I can handle what I need to handle as long as I know that you'll give me the space to do that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. For someone with dyslexia entering the workforce today, specifically dyslexia also, I think, because dyslexia is a particularly interesting neurodiversity. It's one that has a lot of positives, very spatial thinking, lots of connections and problem solving and spotting of errors and fascinating brains. But it inherently impacts the way that you communicate with people, especially in a virtual world. If we're working remotely, for someone with dyslexia that's entering the workforce today, what advice would you give them?
It's a very good question. It seems strange because I'm so big, I spent all my working life knowing I'm dyslexic. Never really thought I was just entering the workplace. I think the first thing is take all the support you can get. Make sure that you can get the right tools, that that you've got your laptop or computer set up for what you need, or your phone, that you adjust the fonts. You take that time to ask for those. You develop, you disclose it. I think that's one of the most important things. I think the one advantage a lot of people with dyslexia have is, certainly in the UK, the way it's diagnosed is often done away from the NHS. So autism, ADHD are done medically. Dyslexia is often done through an educational psychologist. So it's often done at school or university. So people enter the workplace often with that diagnosis. They can feel confident because they've got that bit of paper that no one really ever argues with. With someone who's ADHD, who perhaps suspected it and doesn't know, that's when I think you lack some of the confidence, say. So if it's undiagnosed, just suspected, although usually you have very similar rights. But I think with dyslexia, it's about being confident. And it goes for the other sort of dys group of ND things. So whether it's dysgraphia or dyscalculia or dyspraxia, that being open about it usually is good, because you tend to have documentation and you can get the support quite easily. I think people are quite aware of it as well.
Yes. And they're curious, I think. Some people are trash people and just interact with them as little as possible. But most people, I think, are curious about brains that are different to them. It just never occurred to them that the inside of other people's minds is different than theirs.
Yes, and it's very small differences, isn't it? There's just, there's something in my brain that means I don't read and write as well as other people, but I've learned to adapt. I've learned to solve problems. I might have to work a little harder at some things rather than others. I have to work to be organized. I'm totally disorganized. I'm a very opportunistic type of person. You wouldn't, in the network, I'm not the strongest on the strategy side. I'm probably much stronger on finding an opportunity to, make an announcement, to raise awareness. That's more my strength. But I've got people who I know are very good on the strategy side, who are very focused. So you can use their skills. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about entering the workplace as a dyslexic. I think go for it and just disclose. That's the most important thing. But it's an awkward balance. If if you don't get on with your manager, or you don't feel confident to disclose to your manager, that's more of a challenge. And then I think that leads to, what else do you do? So are there colleagues that you can trust, that you can disclose to, so that then you can feel more confident talking to your manager, especially if you're quite young in the workplace and your manager might be quite a bit older, been in the workplace for 30 odd years like myself. I think that might be one of the issues. And if you can't disclose to your manager, can you talk to your manager's manager? Or is there another route? Is there a freedom to speak up route? Over the years, the NHS has really worked to get freedom to speak up work. So people who are independent that you can go and talk to. They developed over the year from getting sort of non-executive directors and directors who are, although they're very nice people, they might say, if you're quite junior, going to talk to a finance non-exec director is quite a big step. Whereas someone who's in your office, who you've seen around, is much easier to talk to. So those are the sort of things. And also declare it when you apply. So, in the UK, go for the 2-tick scheme. Make sure you ask for support at the interview process. Make sure you ask for support if there's an assessment, about different fonts, extra time possibly. The interview process asks for written questions because, we all know dyslexics need a little time sometimes to think of answers. Interviews shouldn't be about just regurgitating stuff. It's not an exam. It's not who's got the best memory for a load of facts they've absorbed. In the real world, most people in a meeting, you get time to think about a problem and solve it. You might come to the meeting with your solutions. So actually creating a more, asking for a more realistic interview as well to help you get that job as well.
That's such an interesting point because I had to learn what they were actually trying to ask me in interview questions. Because I would come in and I would just answer very honestly, which I ultimately always opted to do because that's how you get.
Yeah.
I'm just going to answer your question literally if that's the question you're asking me. But first I had to understand sort of what it is that they're trying to get out of me. So tell me about yourself. It's too broad a question for my autistic side of my brain. And, name your 3 weaknesses. What are you actually asking me? You're actually seeing if I'm a person who is discerning, if I'm a person who understands what my weaknesses are, if I'm a person who's able to mitigate those weaknesses with whatever. That's what you're looking for. So that's the question I'm going to answer. Because people would say, "What are your weaknesses?" And I would say, "I'm chronically late and also quite disorganized and sometimes I talk really loud." They're like, "Okay." But those are my I mean,
Yeah.
I guess in your workspace, then you might construe that as a weakness, but look at all these good things.
Yes. Yeah, it's not a great question. Yeah, really, really, you do want to find out a little more how they're going to support for your business, aren't they? Really, you want to really
That's what
find
you're
it out.
asking.
Yeah, and just that sort of test and memory and recall perhaps isn't always the best way of getting the best people in. I know there's a debate in some of the sort of HR world in the UK of whether you show everyone the questions or just limited. Some the various so one large department store, John Lewis, made the news headlines because they said every candidate gets the questions in advance. We can put our questions in ChatGPT so we know what the answer is going to be. Very few, most people don't. Most people are able to do it, and you can usually test it. The whole point of interview is to test certain things. You're looking for certain skills. We'll ask the questions to find out the answers.
Exactly. My favorite interview question, before I'm going to ask you our final question, my favorite interview question is, "What are you bad at?" It catches people completely off guard, first of all, which I like. Secondly, what I am specifically asking you for is, are you a person who knows what you're bad at? I don't care what you are bad at. Are you somebody who's comfortable saying, "Oh, I can't play the guitar to save my life"? It literally doesn't matter what it is. I need that level of comfort because we work in a place that supports people with all kinds of weaknesses. Everybody has different weaknesses. So if you are a person who's able to own that weakness and be cool with it, now we have a good starting point.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we were switching it around and assuming the managers are listening to us, what what's one thing they can do tomorrow to be more inclusive or more supportive?
I think, you've got to make sure that you're having regular catch-ups with your staff. But, if you're starting from a blank page, make sure you have check-ins and catch-ups with your staff and ask what you can do to support them. What are your needs? How can I support you? Is there anything I can do to help you? Getting, ready to ask those questions. Most of the time, people don't need a huge amount of support, but there will be a couple of times they will do. And make sure you ask that regularly so that people feel that it's not just a tick box that we do once a year, that you're doing it because you genuinely want to help. There may be, and that goes for every employer, whether you're a typical neurodiverse, there may be times you need a bit of help, a bit of support. It might only be once in your lifetime you're going through a tough time and you need a little bit of support. It helps everyone that way.
Gareth, thank you so
No
much.
problems.
Dyslexia and other neurodiversities are not about a lack of ability.
No.
It's about how systems interpret differences. And when workplaces, even very regimented workplaces like the NHS, when workplaces shift from correction to inclusion, then they can unlock the talent from their people that was always there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining
No
me,
problems.
Gareth.
Thanks for inviting me.
How can people support you or find you or learn more about?
So, I mean, if you're living in England and want to donate blood, it's blood.co.uk. Otherwise, if you Google organ donation, that's for the whole of the UK, you'll be able to find out more about our work there. But it's blood.co.uk for donation in England.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gareth. It has been an absolute pleasure. Until next time, squirrels, the takeaway here is the sooner you can stop giving a fuck, the better off you'll be, I think. And the support exists from the people who want to give it to you. All right, y'all. See you next time.